Hi everyone, and welcome to Daily Revelations, this weekly Bible study where we dive into God's Word one book at a time. We're in the book of Genesis, and this week we're focusing on Genesis 16. And while we study these chapters and go through them 1 week at a time, we use a different precept method to just dig into God's Word and see what He has to reveal individually to us. So I'm sharing what God revealed to me this morning, but it doesn't mean that's just what God has for you. So I encourage you, do the same thing I do and see what God has to say to you. Spend time with Him, listen to Him, and from that we grow. And we also can live in a way that doesn't just go downstream with the rest of the world, because that's basically what we do if we don't work to paddle upstream and seek God and to pursue things that are above our natural tendencies. Because God calls us to be lights in a dark world. He calls us to live a different path than those who are walking in sin and death. And we don't do that on our own, because naturally we go the other way. So that's a lot what God had to share with me this morning. And we're living in a culture that becomes more and more apparent every day, that people react out of hate, out of jealousy, out of just wanting to avoid circumstances. We talked about that already this week. But the precept method that I used, and I encourage you to use on day 3 of our study, which is today, is to look at cross-references. And it was a very strange cross-reference that God sent me to. But again, it still speaks to you. So even if you go, what's going to be in this, or there's nothing there, follow it. Start writing in your journal and see what God has to say, because it started out with verse 12. It says at the very beginning, he will be a wild donkey. And this is God speaking to to Hagar about her son Ishmael. Well, that's something you don't want to hear about your son, especially when you look at the cross-references that talk about how donkeys live. They seek for their food. They live in the wilderness. They don't like being near the city. They're unwilling to listen and hear, and they tend to just wander. But later on in that verse, what even describes this even more is that God states about Ishmael is that, and he will live to the east of his brothers. And that cross-reference is what led me to what God really wanted to speak to me today. And it says that Ishmael, if you go to Genesis 25, and it talks about Ishmael and all of his descendants and lineage, and it says that they lived in defiance towards the east. They lived in defiance of their relatives, and they moved east. So their lives were completely bent on being defiant to how God was leading the rest of their family. And how often do we see our culture doing the same thing? It's not that we choose out of love and compassion to lay down our lives and do other things. No, we're going to go wild and do what we think's best. And often that is a reactionary way to just deal with the situation, instead of being proactive to pour love and compassion into that as God leads us. And so anyways, it's something that we have to consider every time we make a choice, because things can stir up in us. That hate, that anger that's in this world is so prevalent, and we can think that we're immune to it, but we're not. Just turn on politics for a while. People talking about one side or the other and the issues that are going on in our world, and there is so much division and so much hatred and so much reactive living around us. But yet we're called to be different, called to be loving and proactive, pouring out light into this dark world and living for God instead of living for what we think should be the best reaction to what someone else does to us, someone else says to us, or just what's going on in situations all around our country and our world. So just be encouraged. God is in control. That is the end of the story. And we need to trust in that enough to submit to Him and follow His will versus trying to solve the world's problems on our own, because we can't. So hope that's an encouragement for you today. Thanks for joining me on Daily Revelations. I'll see you again tomorrow as we continue our study through Genesis